So I am here with the wonderful writer Reyes Ramirez. Hi, Mr. Ramirez.
Hi, Axis. How you doing?
Doing great. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
My name is Reyes Ramirez. I am a Mexican and Salvadoran American. Salvadoran on my father's side, Mexican on my mother's side. Born and raised in Houston. Was raised a little bit in Mexico. Lived with my mom's family for a bit in Acapulco. Came back here to Houston. Did most of my education here. Did my undergrad at University of Houston in creative writing and political science. I originally majored in journalism and communications, but I then veered more towards the creative side of writing, but still wanted to hold on to my political background. So I did political science. Then I did my MFA in fiction writing at State University. Other than that, I do a lot of organizing. I do teaching, and I try to be open on all fronts in terms of writing, teaching, organizing. So I write fiction, poetry, essays, reviews. I've taught from third grade to senior citizens in and outside of university settings and community centers, English and Spanish. And I've organized readings. I've also organized. I've done a curated art show. I've also curated or edited chapbooks and all that kind of stuff. So I try to keep it open. I try to keep my practice open. I try to involve as many as possible in my practice. And yeah.
So you've done everything essentially.
I try.
Now you cut out a little bit earlier. Where did you say that you got your MFA from?
Texas State University.
Okay, cool. So tell us a little bit about how you do your work. I think one thing that's really interesting about writers is that we constantly have conversations with things around us, whether it's on the political side, social activism side, nature, family. What are you currently in conversation with?
Currently in kind of conversation with my anger. I'm constantly angry, and that kind of there's a usefulness to anger. I think anger can be incredibly useful. It can be incredibly motivating, but sometimes it can kind of tire you out. It can burn you out. And so right now I'm just trying to find ways to control kind of like my feelings and my anger towards what's happening in America. What's always been happening in America, what will happen in America, and trying to even that out in the way that I do my practice in terms of my organizing, my teaching, and my writing. So in terms of my writing, I try to do, I think for a lot of writers, writing from a place of intention or tension is kind of the norm, I feel, but I've been trying to get more into poems and works of joy, or getting at joy. And so right now it's kind of like filtering that anger, thinking, my anger can be useful for me, but how do I make it useful for others? And so my poems right now, I'm writing poems that are kind of serving as portraits of lesser known Mexican American, Salvadoran American figures in history. To kind of serve as their record, but also be a creative interpretation of history, but also introduce people to maybe figures that they weren't aware of. And then I try to find them in the most kind of innocuous or quote unquote innocuous places. Like there is a Salvadoran American park ranger named George Melendez Wright, who essentially wrote like the book on like how the national park forest system like preserves national forests. And he wrote the book on it, but he also paid for it himself when the national originally started. It's the kind of just little moments in history like that. So I think it kind of evens out my anger where I'm like, how can our history always keep getting erased and taken or like kind of omitted? But it's like, well, through my poetry, I can help continue it and let everyone else know about it. But also through joy, where it's like, it's been done before, it can't be done again. In my fiction, I try to write about characters that go through kind of traumatic things or sad things, but kind of just continue their life living on. I think one common thing within a lot of like marginalized groups is that they go through these things, but life has to go on, and you can still feel joy, you can still be happy, you can still love. So I try to get my characters to kind of like, for their pain, also reach a place of enlightenment or beyond that. In my nonfiction, including like essays and reviews, I either process pop culture or I try to support other writers or artists of Latinx descent. And so I feature a lot of like Salvadoran American artists, Mexican American poets, and so I try to write reviews for them, but I also kind of try to include pop culture in my reviews and also in my essays.
Wow, so you're doing a lot, and that's great to hear, because I always like to hear about writers kind of working on their craft constantly. So you hit on a couple of things that I think are interesting. You talked about being angry, because this is for the database, and one day it will not be these times, it'll be not these times. Can you talk about a little bit about what you're angry about specifically, and how you try to find joy?
I'm specifically angry just in all kinds of different realms and contexts. As a teacher, I'm kind of angry at kind of I guess the academic term would be the school to prison pipeline, but kind of even just in everyday instances of education, whether it be from elementary school all the way to the university level. Just kind of the idea of like what a classroom ought to be, and then like how children of color are disproportionately punished for the same behavior that their white counterparts will do, and sort of how that's even grounds for taking their education away from them, whether it be through detention or expulsion or assigned to alternative education. And so I'm kind of angry how like America constantly creates ways to take something away, whether it be education, rights, or even their life. I'm angry that with the election of President Donald Trump, and how, not that it hasn't been there before, but now it's been kind of even supported, these channels of hate. And so now you get kind of the kind of, how do I say this? Kind of think about it in terms of like how, let's say in some states, the lowest common denominator is elected into office based purely on being white, on whiteness, on supporting whiteness, and it often takes the very best of a marginalized people, the very best. They have to do everything, 100% clean, and they still won't be elected, or they still won't be given equal representation. And I think that's always kind of been America, but now it's more than ever. And now it's especially pertinent through violence, where it's now like any white dude with a gun can roll up anywhere and kill people. And meanwhile, people of color even look funky, even look weird in a public setting, and that's its grounds enough to even have them killed. And so with all that in mind, with the violence being done to children, to adults, to everyone, I find joy through creating things that I think make people laugh, make people think, make people kind of start conversations with each other, and learn something that they may have not known before. And so particularly with like the poetry of like portraits of like lesser known Latinx figures in history, kind of I like looking at someone's face and being like, I didn't know that. And now they're going to do more research, and now they're going to feel prouder than they were yesterday, knowing that this is their history, that they know that if someone can do something beautiful, they can too. And so I like inspiring how to make people to make beautiful things. And so that's how I try to find joy.
That's a great way of finding joy. Let's talk a little bit about literature in general, because you're part of the database. What inspires you as a writer? If there are any other writers, any other stories that inspire you to do your work?
Constantly I'm inspired by things. Kind of going in line with being a writer is like, how do I process these things and how do I put them in, like, if it's a story I'm writing, maybe how do you put it in a kind of in that format? And so for me, what's inspiring me right now is looking back on just kind of innocuous things that people like, and how do you make that the world? And so, like, for example, some of the stories I've been writing right now were inspired by like anime I grew up watching, and it's kind of interesting to see kind of like Latinx, kind of youth engaging with anime, with like Japanese like culture, and so kind of like how even that's monopolized by like white nerds and stuff like that, but like how do we get other people of color to enjoy this thing that's made by people of color? And so, for example, some stories I've written were inspired by like anime, or like whether I write like a story about like mecha, like robots, controlling robots. And so kind of like in an American historical context, like in terms of like war or like work or labor, it's usually like, right, like people of color that usually are the ones that are assigned to do these things first, whether it be like Tuskegee Airmen or it's braceros or something like that. They're always usually sent in the field first. And so I was like, oh, what if we lived in the future with giant robots? Well, who's going to be the first to control these and test these things out? Right. Other things I'm inspired by, just living life in Houston. I used to ride the bus a lot. And so I'd always be inspired by just like in the idea of like being in a one space, and everyone from all different parts of the world are just going to get on one bus and be together for a moment, not even look at each other. But the fact that that happens is magical. So pretty much everything. Drinking beer. I've been writing, trying to write essays about beer, particularly how, like how we interact with alcohol, particularly America and people of color, and how who gets to enjoy it, who doesn't get to enjoy it, for what reasons. But in terms of literature, other writers that inspire me, tons of people in Houston, other people I imagine that are featured. I don't know the exact people that are featured in the database, but I'm sure I'm inspired by all of them, like Lupin, Leslie. I'm also inspired by, lately I've been revisiting Toni Morrison, one of the best to ever do it, and kind of looking back on how she uses history and how she reinterprets history, rereading, just doing a lot of rereading right now, kind of going back into kind of my kind of literary genealogy and who has inspired me, and kind of going back. And I read these books years ago, and now I'm kind of rereading them again, like Marquez. But in terms of new people, I just read Kisi Lehman's Heavy.
Yes, great book.
Amazing, absolutely amazing. That's another thing I'm trying to like test out, like how to be that vulnerable and be honest with your reader and with yourself. How do you do that? I think he does it brilliantly, and so I'm trying to learn how he does it. Yeah. In terms of poetry, I just read Dennis Smith's Don't Call Us Dead,
which is a fantastic collection. Oh my God, we're gonna have to talk about this collection because, well, not right now, but later on another phone call.
Yes. Summer Somewhere, I'm constantly rereading that one because that I'm trying to write long poems, and that poem doesn't feel long at all. It's like almost 20 pages, and it doesn't feel like a 20-page poem. Wow. So that's amazing. So I'm always constantly looking out for new poets, and those are the ones that come to mind right now.
Let's talk a little bit about the writing scene in Houston. I think this is one of the things I have had the pleasure and privilege of writing like the intro to this database. One of the things I mentioned is that Houston's a pretty literary city, and people who are in the know that it's also a very heavily literary city for Mexican American literati, essentially. You're in the scene as well, so talk a little bit of what it's like for people who've never been to a reading. When you tell them this, they are looking at you funny, saying, no, it's not, but yes, it is.
Actually, I used to write reviews a lot, book reviews. And at some point I got tired out because one sad thing is that book reviews aren't really paid for, or the writers aren't really paid a lot. So I try to choose the ones that, when I have time, I do it. But one thing that came to know, I was like, yo, I don't have time to read all the books published by Houston poets and writers. Because even this year alone, there's just so many that came out, like Leslie's Night Bloom Cenote, Lupe's Why I'm Like Tequila, Houston Noir. I haven't even gotten through all of that. Brian Washington's Locked. And the tons more, and that's only for like Houston, and I have friends in Austin. Now there's so many books being published from there. And so for like Houston, it's just, it's so much that you really have to like take a break to take it all in. And so when you go to readings, you're like, can I go to all these readings? Because there's just so many readings that are happening that are put on either by a program or an institution, but then there's like the ones that are done independently, that are like community centers or bars. And it's just kind of like, I would say that the Houston literary scene is so vibrant and it's so rich that it just takes a while to become acclimated to it, to be part of it, to contribute to it. But on the flip side, there's so much to learn from, and there's so many people to work with. There's so many people to talk to. And so I think the Houston literary scene, I think when you kind of like look for it and you seep yourself in it, it can be pretty overwhelming at first, but in a lot of ways, it's also such a community. You can talk to so many different people, and you'll get a completely different vision each time. And that's the literary scene. I mean, the art scene, that's even more ridiculous in number. And so when you expand it past literary, and I only say that because I write like reviews and like art criticism, and it's kind of like joining those worlds, and like how do you get these kind of like amazing people to talk to each other? How do you get these writers? How do you get artists to talk to each other? And it's just, it can be kind of overwhelming at first, but then once you make those friends and once you become part of that community, I wouldn't have any other way.
So let's go back to your what you do on the page. What is the thing that you want your readers to walk away with whenever they read maybe a poem or a fiction piece or a nonfiction piece from you? What do you want them to walk away with?
I would like my readers to walk away with a sense or a new way of seeing the world. So every poem I write, every nonfiction piece, every fiction piece I write, I try to put something that illuminates something that might have not been seen before. And so a lot of my poems, what they'll do is they'll either feature something or focus on something or present it, something that you're already acquainted with in a different way, with the idea being that I think every person has intrinsic value in the way they see things. Whether it's done well, that's another question. That's for the art, and that's for the craft, for the audience, and for what purpose. That's also again up to interpretation. But I think if I believe I'm worth listening to, if I believe that my stuff is worth reading, then I have to believe that
That's deep, yo. Not gonna lie. That was really deep. All right. So one last question. I always like to ask writers this. Where do you think American letters is going now? What's the future of American letters?
The future of American letters?
Mm-hmm.
I think what's going to happen is that there's going to be a lot of voices, new voices, diverse voices that are going to come up. And I think at some point there's going to be an issue on whether or not institutions will ever keep up if they want to, whether that be publishing houses or journals or universities. And I think that's going to be the ultimate test of what we consider American letters, whether or not American letters wants to or is ready to accept this kind of the diversity that was always there but was never given a voice. And I'm curious to kind of see how that plays, because I think what I've seen a lot of like young writers and younger people is kind of like they're noticing that their world is not being reflected, and whose fault is that? And it can't be theirs because they're the ones creating art, they're the ones creating poetry, these beautiful, gorgeous things. So you know, it's never been about like not enough people are producing. People have always been producing. They've always been doing amazing things. Just whether or not if the institutions are willing and or capable. And so I think there's going to be at some point a clash that's going to be much more louder and people calling these things out. And that could even take in the place of people starting their own publishing houses or taking up space and then letting others in. I think that's always going to grow.